Welcome, everyone. First of all, sorry about it. We've got some technical issues, but everything is sorted, so we are here back. Welcome for those who are connected from Europe, and good morning, as I was saying, for those connecting from Latin America and other parts of the world. And thank you very much for being part of our masterclass that we are celebrating today. As I was saying before, my name is Vanessa, and I'm one of the admissions managers of EA Business School in Barcelona. At EAE today, with this event, with this masterclass, we want to approach you and maybe get a real idea about what do you feel when you are in a class in our business school. To feel and be able to touch our methodology, learning by doing, that it's concentrate on working day by day with real cases and projects by the hand of executive professors, professors with a huge experience in different international corporations and industries. In fact, on the masterclass of today, what we'll do is analyze how international companies are changing and taking decisions on the socioeconomic and political context that we are living due to post-Trump area, due to COVID, due to the VUCA environments that we are living. Actually, it's an honor to introduce Mr. Gur Saraf, that is one of our international MBA and MBA professors in EA Business School, and that he will be the person taking care of this masterclass. What I would like to do is to talk and introduce him before. Gur is the director and board member of Europe India Chamber of Commerce in Spain. He is also a professor at the Business School, as I was saying, teaching in several subjects of the MBA's programs. Specialized actually in international development management, economy, and political changes. His over 20 years international experience in creating and managing global enterprises and projects in the United States, India, Russia, Ukraine, Spain, and UK. So he's been working in more than 7 countries. Currently, he's involved in investments and business development work in the solar energy between India and Spain. Mr. Saraf was previously the Vice President of Technology Transfer for McDonnell Douglas, where he was responsible for structuring joint ventures and licensing agreements between Spanish companies like Telefonica and US companies from Silicon Valley. He has worked our projects raising farm incomes in Ukraine, the government development, in the government of Spain on projects relating to India. At the same time, Mr. Saraf is socially active in the Spanish community due that he is volunteer for Fundación Vicente Ferrer. We are so glad of being to leave a masterclass by the hands of such a relevant professional that will be able to listen in a few minutes. At the same time, I think that it's very important when you face a masterclass of this level. During the masterclass, you will have doubts, questions. You can write down on the chat. We will have a chat, so you can write down all your questions. And at the end of the masterclass, we will read all these questions, and Gur will be able to answer to all your questions. Thank you very much. Welcome again. I leave you on the best hands. So big hello to Gur. So enjoy. Hello, Gur. How are you? That's so nice to see you.
Hello, Vanessa. How are you today?
Very good, thank you. Very happy and glad of being here and to have the chance to be in one of your amazing class.
I really appreciate the initiative that you have taken and the opportunity you have given to share these moments with students and prospective students, the audience, on how we run our classes over here, but also to talk about a very key topic, a little bit of a catchy topic, which is how to successfully manage your business in the post-Trump and revolutionary political era. So let's get started without wasting any moments. Let's take a look at what has been going on in the last couple of weeks. As you know, the last couple of weeks have been important from geopolitical agenda point of view with the US elections, first and foremost. Of course, with the new current administration now taking a role, an active role, to be back on the global stage, leading the free world. So all of the isolationist policies seem to have been put on the back burner, and now this particular administration is boldly stating, in fact, were one of the first announcements that came out of the White House, that we want to join the world once again. We want to be part of the Climate Control Treaty, otherwise known as the Paris Accord or Paris Agreement, for instance. A very important treaty, as you may imagine, for one of the huge problems that we are facing, which is global warming. Then they didn't stop there. Who? WHO, World Health Organization. We want to be back with the World Health Organization. The previous administration had taken a stance that we are not quite sure if we want to continue to remain, but this particular administration is saying no, we want to continue to fund. And in fact, the United States is one of the biggest funders, if not the biggest one, for the WHO at this moment of time. So, what does this all mean, folks? It means that multilateralism, which is the ability of group of nations to get together for a common goal, is back on the table. All right, that is good news for the world. It, in fact, reduces to some degree the volatility in decision making at the highest levels. And looking forward, going forward, we hope to have a more cooperative agenda that we truly need given the extent of this particular crisis. Having said this, I also want to bring to your attention that President Biden, in his 40 plus years of public service, has always taken a pro-Atlanticist stand. What does that mean? What does pro-Atlanticist mean? It means that policies that favor a more congenial, a more working relationship, an engaged relationship with countries on both sides of the Atlantic. In other words, the United States and North America and the European Union. So we do see that this particular pro-Atlantic position will strengthen and deepen the relationships between the two geographical areas, between multiple countries that really hold the key in many ways for a successful implementation of getting us out of the current pandemic predicament that we are in. Other thing that is kind of a legacy that has come in even before the COVID hit us and even before the previous administration came to power was a reality. That is a reality that we are today living in a multipolar world. In other words, a world that is dominated by many powers, not a single power. As you may remember, in the good old days of the Soviet Union, you had a bipolar world, right? The Cold War, as it was known in those days. And with the collapse of the Soviet Union, we went into a unipolar world where the United States dominated for the longest period of time the world economic stage, both militarily, economically, in this particular order. However, we now find many, many other regional powers that have come in. China, of course, the European Union, India, Brazil, South Africa, just to name a few. And they are going to change the dynamics of the world that we are going to see going forward. But let us not forget, we have right besides us, besides you and me, right next to you, the 800-pound gorilla, which is COVID-19. It's still around, unfortunately, and it is creating havoc with our economy. Social fabric is being destroyed with the haves and the have-nots having the biggest economic division that we have seen in years, many of which we are also going to face after a suitable vaccine has been found. All right, so it's not going to just go away with a vaccine. Vaccine is not going to be the panacea. It will be the right step, undoubtedly, Undoubtedly, because vaccines, as we know from history, whether it was the flu vaccine or the cholera vaccine or the typhoid vaccine, they helped us to manage to survive in this densely packed world. Without vaccines, we wouldn't be living here. So, for those of you who are having any doubts, please don't, because a vaccine is absolutely essential in order for us to continue to move forward in a post COVID world. Having said that, the vaccine was fast tracked because there was no time to lose. And of course, we are going through many of the issues. In the meantime, the virus hasn't waited, has it? It has continued to mutate, and we have now much more serious strains that have come out from Great Britain. We have another strain that is going on right now as we speak in Brazil, in the Manaus Amazon area, and of course the South African variant, all of which is going to put a lot of questions on how effective, what is the real efficacy level of the vaccine that we have developed based on the old variant that had come out of Wuhan, China. So we have to see. Of course, laboratory tests can tell you one thing, but it's not until the rubber hits the road, it's not until when we see it actually practiced that we would really know that it works and how effectively it works. In addition, the world still continues to have the problems, of course, right now a little bit less visible, but nevertheless very, very important and very fundamental issues relating to sustainability, global warming, and income inequality. These issues have been going on since globalization began. Some of them even began when the Industrial Revolution began, all right, with the global warming phenomena, with the CO2 being emitted. Mostly activities related to human activity on this particular planet. So, in other words, these are issues that are coming directly as a result of what you and I do on this particular planet. So, we can't really blame it on anyone else other than try to look back and to see what we can do in order to mitigate some of these risks going forward. All right. So, when we are confronted with a risk, and when we give a class, there are so many risks out there that you really can't even begin to think where do we begin and where do we end. Now, keep in mind when I talk about risk, and even though I'm not mentioning it, I'm also leaving the door open for you to think of it as an opportunity. Because whenever there is a risk, there is an opportunity. In fact, as you know, the Japanese and the Chinese, they have always had a same word for risk and for opportunity. In other words, it's the same side or the two sides of the same coin. So keep in mind when I mention risk, that doesn't mean that it wouldn't translate into an opportunity if you looked at it in a more positive light. All right. So let's get started. So what happened is when we look into trying to frame all of these risks coming in from so many different areas around the world, the framework that we use is something that we call a political risk analysis framework. Now, this was a science that was developed over the last 50 years. In other words, it's a relatively new science, and it is based on many, many social sciences and many physical sciences. In other words, it is involving multiple disciplines, disciplines such as economics, such as biology. I mean, think about the pandemic. I mean, you do need the contribution from biology to understand the risk, and sociology to understand why manifestations occur, for example, in some parts of the world and in other parts they don't. All of these different areas of study were put into place in order to give us this wonderful, really exciting area of study, which is extremely dynamic, that we call political risk analysis. And political risk analysis basically says, well, you know what? To get a handle on the type of risks, let's categorize them by three risks. So the first type is risks that originates from the company itself. We call that firm specific risks. In other words, the company itself is responsible for the risk when it is actually involved in business. Now, what is the biggest risk that the company can impose on itself other than bad strategy, etc.? All of those are well known. Well, in addition to all of that, the biggest one is an area called corporate governance. And I'm going to spend a couple of minutes on it because it is really one of the key areas of study. And I will tell you why it has become even more important in the last 5 years. So, what is corporate governance? Corporate governance is basically practice, behavior, policy within a company that ensures that the best interests of the stakeholders are maintained. Of course, as you all know, stakeholders inside a company can be many: shareholders, workers, employees, suppliers, the community where it works. These are all stakeholders. So, the biggest and the most important, of course, is the investor, the shareholder. And we want to ensure that their interest and, of course, the broader interest of all of the stakeholders are basically taken into consideration. Now, that wasn't always the case. For years, we had problems, we had issues with corporate governance. And there was practically a breakdown, a lack of corporate governance. And what did that translate into? When businesses went outside of their home country, for instance, because of the weak corporate governance structure that they basically had exposure to higher level of risks. So, right from the start, we know one thing, that if we want to reduce our risk inside the company, let's start from within. You know who said that? Gautama Buddha. 2500 years ago, Gautama Buddha said, many of the problems come from outside, but most of the solutions begins from inside. All right, and that is where corporate governance can play a big role. So if companies begin to play and look at their corporate governance and begin to strengthen it and begin to make sure that they're taking care of the interests of their shareholders and of the community being the people and the planet. The people not only who are working with them, we call them inside stakeholders, but the outside stakeholders, such as the community, for instance, to ensure that we are doing good for the planet. And this has become very, very important because initially the idea of a corporation was just to make a profit for the shareholder, not any longer. Today, we have a higher purpose. We call it a purpose based organization, and we want the corporations to ensure that they are able to get to that level through proper corporate governance rules. The added bonus for you, for businesses that do listen and do want to get involved in this, is that there are funds. There are large institutional funds. Funds are, of course, pools of money that are owned by various groups, hedge funds, mutual funds, institutional funds, that are investing in companies based on ESG. This is a magical word that has come into existence a few years ago, and it stands for environment, social governance. In other words, we are evaluating you as a company not just based on your profitability, as we did previously, but we are evaluating you now on your ESG, which is the environment, social, and your corporate governance, which is why I like to start over here, because that is a kind of a thing that you can control. Now let's take a look at the other kind of risks that can happen when you're going in. Again, coming in from the Trump era, coming in after the Trump era, and from before the Trump era. These risks can be, again, categorized as risks that are originating from the country. In other words, each country has its own rules of game, corruption, bureaucracy, and that can then influence the way risks can play out when you go into a particular country. Right now, if I were to pick up one big risk, and that is the big risk that is coming in from the fact that countries will be at different levels of where they are in relative to the progress they are making on eradicating COVID-19 from their borders. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, as you all know, we will need vaccine in order to reach some level of herd immunity. All right. In order to reach herd immunity, we have to have a vast percentage of the population in a country, in fact, in the world, vaccinated. Now, how easy is that process? It's not easy. We're looking at 8 billion people, and these vaccines require a temperature controlled cold chain. Some of them require minus 70 degrees centigrade throughout. Now, think about the countries where there is no power. How are they going to ensure that they're going to get it to the last mile? And then the problems that we are seeing in the developed world, where the power does exist, where the cold chain does exist, is the mismatch between the availability of the vaccines and people that are there standing on the line to get vaccinated. So that is a logistical issue, a huge issue which we have never placed or which we have never faced ever. In fact, I call it the biggest global supply chain problem we have ever faced. And we will need to be really thinking out of the textbooks in order to come out of a solution for this. Now, for the wealthier countries, let's divide the countries up into wealthier countries and the less wealthier countries. The wealthier countries may have, because of the resources that they have, a easier time. But think of all of the developing world countries. Where are they going to be in terms of how they roll out the vaccine? Imagine how much of an issue they will have. Think about the strains that will be multiplying in the meantime that may then actually thwart the vaccine itself. So we are looking at multiple issues that can arise, and really it then becomes a race against time to get the people vaccinated before the variations begin to occur, before the mutations begin to occur. And of course, there will be a big divide between the rich countries and the less wealthier countries, the developing world. And we'll have to see how it plays out, and that will then pose country specific risks based on where they are. The other risks that I see coming in is the level of indebtedness. How? Well, as you know, the macroeconomy of the world has been shattered. The GDP has plummeted everywhere. Incomes have gone down. And the governments are bailing out this particular situation by taking on debt. Huge debts. In fact, some countries, the developed world, has reached 130, 140% of their GDP in terms of debt, and it's growing. So, how will these developing world countries face this indebtedness crisis? That is something that we have to watch out and will be an issue. And it will play out, again, looking at it from a company point of view, when we go out and invest in a company, whether we can transfer the funds back, we call that transfer risk. That will then get exaggerated. That will get exacerbated because of the lack of funding that that particular country may have. All right, I hope I'm making myself clear. Of course, all of these issues are very rich issues, and if you want more specific answers, I'll be giving you the answers after the class. All right, we call those transfer risks, but they'll be coming in largely from indebtedness, and that would have been generated just to come out of the economic hole that they have in. The third level of economic risk, or third level of social risks, that will be coming again from country to country. Each country is different. You really can't put everybody in the same situation, are protests and social discontent post pandemic. Now, how do we know that? Again, history is a good lesson. Whenever there has been pandemics in the past, okay, let's take, for example, the 1840 cholera outbreak in Paris. All right, it was devastating. And of course, it played out very similar to what has been played out and is playing out right now. The rich were less affected, the poor were much more affected in Paris, right? As the cholera took its toll, killing a lot of people, the poorer sections of the society, a lot more than the richest sections. There was no discontent when the cholera outbreak was going on. This is interesting. Why? Because people were so busy, preoccupied, worried about just trying to save their lives. But once the pandemic ended, that is when all of the manifestations and all of the social discontent began to arise in France. And this type of a situation has been played out in other pandemics. So watch out for that, folks. that may play out. And there is a good possibility, depending on the country, because a lot of the countries are going to be in an economic crisis and they will not be able to recover. The population that has been suppressed so far, that has taken the brunt of all of this, literally the poorer section of the population, they are going to be coming out really with serious social discontent manifestations. All right, so that is another level of risk that I'm seeing will be something we have to prepare ourselves for. Now let's take a look at some of the global risks. What are global risks? Global risks are those risks that originate from outside of the firm and outside of the company itself. In other words, they come from anywhere in the world. And as we have been talking about it, you can practically connect the dots and you can imagine what some of the examples of global risks are, such as global warming, right? It is a risk for the entire world. The CO2 that comes out from Asia basically has an impact on us. It's not going to be limited because the CO2 does not know any political borders after all, does it? All right, the same thing with the use of non-sustainable practices, such as the use of water. So water shortages are going to appear as well. All right, we already saw that play in a kind of a trailer, kind of a teaser in Cape Town a few years back when basically we went into ground zero, which was the taps stopped functioning. Okay, I'm sure that has probably come to your attention, but we are looking at it in a much more massive scale that is actually playing out. That is happening in many parts of the world, and it doesn't get reported because it's been institutionalized, and that is going to get exacerbated because the way in which we use water. In fact, wars are going to be fought over water before they're going to be fought over crude petroleum, because you can live without crude petroleum for a few days, but you cannot live without water for even a day. All right, we are so used to it. So that is a risk going forward, and we have to be planning as businesses, thinking what can we do as citizens of the world. Remember, businesses like us are citizens of the world, and we all have a role to play in this. Added to that, we can add many other global risks: air, water, and land pollution, cybercrime, and basically the list goes on. And I'm going to give you a quick way in which we try to deal with these risks from a business point of view. In other words, now that I've given you a whole range of risks, some of these risks apply to some businesses, other risks apply to other businesses, some risks apply because I'm working in a particular country, some apply because it's independent of the country. How do we deal with this? So I'm going to show you a couple of tools. I don't want to make it an academic story over here. For that, you can come to the class. But really to give you kind of a tools that are used right now in order to mitigate, in order to identify and deal with such as the risks that I've been talking about. All right, so I've already mentioned to you the political risk analysis as a discipline. All right, I'm going to fast forward on this particular slide. We need to plan. The main takeaway from this particular slide is that businesses need to plan. All right, knowing that there are risks, we cannot venture out in the world with our eyes shut. In other words, it's like driving your car in the dark without your headlights on. Would you want to be doing that? No. That is why this whole analysis now comes to use, is very useful for businesses to plan out what to do. So the framework is called the political risk analysis and mitigation plan. And basically, it consists of a 5-step methodology. What does it include? First, you identify the risk factors. And I have an example, a quick example to show you in the second slide. So you don't have to remember all of this. Just see it for what it is, and then we'll just work it out for a particular small case, a simple case, in the next slide. So number one, identify the risk factors. All right, you need to know what the risk factors are. All right, sometimes we use experts for it. Sometimes we use Monte Carlo simulation for it. There are many, many tools that are out there, depending on how sophisticated you want to become in trying to come up with this particular analysis. Then we estimate a probability score. In other words, what is the probability of that risk occurring? Probability, as you may have learned from your basic math class, is anything ranging from 0 to 1. 0 means there is a zero probability or a zero chance that this particular risk is occurring or is going to occur. If that is going to, if the probability is 0, then that shouldn't even make it on the risk factor, as you can imagine. 1 means that there's a 100% chance that the risk factor will occur. Number 3, we then analyze, well, let's say if that risk were to occur, what would be the impact on our business? How negatively would it impact our business? Remember, risk is anything that negatively impacts our business, right? So what would be the score? And we normally give a score of 1 to 5, 5 being the highest impact, 1 being the lowest impact. Once we have calculated that, then we multiply the probability times impact to identify which are the major risks. All right, because it's impossible for any particular executive, for a decision maker, for somebody who's managing a business in a particular country, or a project manager. We use this also in project management quite a bit, to then be able to identify the major risks. All right, and once you have done that, then we try to create a mitigation plan. The mitigation plan ideally should be proactive. In other words, let's do things before the risk even occurs, right? Isn't that the better place to be in? But if we can't be, then we try to manage the risk proactively or reactively, and then that becomes more like damage control. All right, so let's take an example. It'll be clear. Let's assume that here is a business. It could be anywhere in the world today. It could be in Europe, United States, and that business is importing coffee from a developing country. All right, simple business. Now let's apply what we have been talking about in this particular simple political risk analysis and mitigation plan. So what kind of risk factors can come into play if you think about it? Well, one of the big risk factors, as you have probably heard about, child labor. Child labor is using the labor of children, of people who are not legally the age to work, as a way to reduce your cost of production. Unfortunately, it's a big problem. We know that. It's a problem all businesses are trying to control. But sometimes the problem begins not with their supplier, but with the supplier of the suppliers, somewhere in the value chain, somewhere in the supply chain. But it is their job, because the backlash can be on them, right? To ensure that no child labor gets involved in the supply chain. All right. So for this particular business, we gave it a probability of 0.3, and we said that the impact in terms of harmed reputation could be 3. And probability times impact gave us a score of 0.9, right? So we got 0.9 for that. And then what could be the mitigation plan for a business? Well, we could have stronger corporate governance. We come back to stronger corporate governance, making the policies inside the company, particularly towards the suppliers. We also call that the supplier's code of conduct, that they be strict, and that people who are in the supply chain are following them to the letter to ensure that this particular risk doesn't occur. Then other risks, tariff increase, that the duty, tariff being duty, can go up. Again, the same methodology. Of course, if the tariff goes up, the price of importing the coffee in your country becomes higher, right? As you can imagine. And that can then harm your business. So what can you do as a mitigation plan? You can find alternative sources of supply before that particular problem occurs. Number 3, risk factor, irregular weather patterns. As we all know, that the weather around the world is experiencing irregular weather activity, whether it was a snowstorm a few weeks back in Madrid, right? Or problems with fires in Australia or California, and hurricanes. This is all irregular. In fact, I'm not trying to say that hurricanes didn't exist, but the repeatability and the number of frequency by which they are happening and the strength by which they are happening is telling us, hey, listen, something not right is occurring in this planet. All right. And this is, of course, being tied in increasingly to our global warming, in other words, effect. So now, again, as I'm a business person, I'm a coffee importer. How can that affect me? Is something that you may be thinking. All right. So it can affect me. Why? Because if there's an irregular weather pattern, the coffee harvest in a particular year, because of a frost, for instance, may mean that there is lower production and that the prices go up, right? That can come and harm my business. So, how do I do protect myself for this particular risk that can occur? Well, I could get involved in hedging myself, price hedging using the Chicago Board of Trade, for example, to hedge myself in the futures market to ensure that I'm still able to buy my coffee at the price without having to risk the increase in prices, for instance. This is just one tool. Other ways in which you can do it, of course, the longer term is to for all of us to get involved in reducing the CO2 footprint so that we in turn can reduce the impact of global warming on irregular weather patterns that is being experienced or being manifested by irregular weather patterns. All right. So again, long term, short term. Everything can't be solved in one day. We know that. And we have to be thinking about them. Uh, the other last risk factor, again, this is not an exhaustive list by any stretch of imagination, folks. It's four that I came up to keep it simple. The list can go up. For a large company, they can run into 50 risks. But I kept it simple. I kept it at four. So the fourth one is protest by coffee farmers for fair income. As you know, most of the money that is made in the cultivation and in the sale of coffee, who gets to have that? You guessed it. It's the middlemen, it's the intermediaries. The growers don't get anything. I faced that firsthand when I was working on a project in Ukraine with the farmers. I saw that. They don't earn anything. So, what is the way to ensure that the protest that results from by the coffee farmers because they're not getting a fair share of the income, how do we ensure that we can reduce this risk? Well, we could do that by creating fair trade coffee supply chains where we begin to buy directly from the farmer instead of having to buy it directly to the intermediaries. Okay, so this is a simple, again, just to give you a quick and a dirty idea of what is political risk analysis and mitigation plan and the kind of things that we do in the class, just so that you understand, so that we can get a handle on the risk. All right, risks are many, but we want to get a handle on the risk because businesses are asking for it. We want to know what we can do. We don't want to be seen as helpless, that we can't do anything about it. Yes, we can. A lot of us can actually together do a lot of things. And here is one blueprint that you see right in front of you. All right, continuing. So, I want to now take you into a scenario. I've already mentioned where we are, the multilateral world, the problems that we are facing, and the biggest one that we have to resolve before anything else, really, which is COVID 19. All right, based on that, what are the risks that we are seeing today? Let's take a look at that. And I think you'll find this pretty interesting, this particular section of it. All right, so I've come up with these three scenarios going forward in the next year. My time frame is 2000, end of 2021, 2022. That is the time frame I'm talking about of how we are going to come out of this. So let's look at scenario number one, and I've given it the three B's: the bad, benign, and the blockbuster scenario, just to make it a little bit catchy and fun. All right, the bad scenario is that we have a huge delay in vaccine rollout around the world, not just in the developed world. Okay, in the developed world, we are seeing it already happening. All right, there is in fact some sort of a vaccine war, a mini vaccine war going on, as you have probably been reading in the newspaper in the developed world. But the developing world hasn't even seen anything. Nothing has even reached there yet. So let's say there's a huge delay in the rollout of vaccines across the world for the reasons we just talked about. And in addition, the efficiency of the vaccine itself is put to doubt. In other words, it doesn't work very well for the new, continuously mutating strains that are coming out. It is a possibility. All right, it is a possibility. One cannot really rule it out. What happens then? Well, in that particular scenario, the economy may grow relatively fast in the first year because of all of the pent up demand, of all of the suppressed consumer demand. And as people begin to see even some positive effects, and that raises the human spirit, we will see some industries recover. But with the delays and with the mutations coming back, with lockdowns on a rollout basis occurring in different parts of the world, that recovery is in a danger of tapering off. That is the bad scenario. What is the benign scenario? Benign scenario is that we'll see a faster rollout of vaccines. All right, the world really gets its act together and we go full steam. All right, we'll need the cooperation of the world for this. It's not going to happen by itself. And if we see that happening, faster rollout of vaccines and the data on the efficacy of the vaccine is good, that it is actually helping us to prevent the spread of the virus. And it is, in fact, even countering the effect of the new variations on the virus. That is a benign scenario, right? In that case, the economy will grow faster, a lot faster than scenario one, and it is likely to be more lasting. All right, you will see that grow, and the growth will continue to last for a longer time. Now let's look at the big blockbuster scenario. I like to call it the badass scenario, right? Everybody wants that. But it's a moonshot. It's a moonshot at this particular moment of time. Let's analyze that particular scenario. Scenario 3 is extremely good vaccine rollout. All right? Outstanding data on efficacy. And combined with a robust dissemination of new technologies that are waiting here on the cusp, that have already been introduced, such as the digitalization, for instance, artificial intelligence, for instance, biotech, for instance. All of this then begins to come in at the same time, begins to be applied, combined with one thing. This is the main thing: productivity gains. What is productivity? Productivity is how much output you get for a given input. That is productivity. With strong productivity gains, we are going to have a repeat scenario of the roaring 20s. All right? I know the roaring 20s happened a lot before our time. Roaring 20s is a period known in the global history of 1920s. And there are extremely close parallels to both of them, to what we are facing today and what was faced by the world in 1920. In other words, almost 100 years ago, the world went through a very similar scenario. What was the similar scenario? You know that already. We had the Spanish flu, a bad name, unfortunately. It didn't start from Spain, so it shouldn't have been called the Spanish flu, but the name stuck. Why? Because Spain was not in war. World War I was going on, unfortunately, and Spain was the one first reporting the virus. And as a result, it got the name. So Spanish flu, of course, took many lives. In fact, more people died as a result of Spanish flu than they died in World War I. And of course, because of the number of deaths and because there was no vaccine in those days, we developed a herd immunity only as a result of so many people dying, something that we are not ready to face today, right? We don't want herd immunity to come as a result of deaths. We want the herd immunity to come as a result of a vaccine. That is the difference. But the parallels are very, very similar. So roaring 20s are known in economic history, when we talk about macroeconomics, as one of the singular periods in history when growth was dramatic, extremely dramatic, particularly in the developed world like the United States. Let's take a look. This particular next slide will show you, and I will ask for your indulgence to tell me later on what you think about it. All right. So here is the scenario, folks. All right. So what were the factors common in both pandemics in the roaring 20s, which was 1920s, and today, 100 years later, 2021? All right, the COVID-19. Well, first of all, the epidemic was there in both cases. The Spanish flu then and the COVID-19 and its variants now, right? That is in common. Number two, was there a suppressed consumer demand? At that time, did demand fall off the cliff when the flu occurred? Yes, of course. People were trying to save their lives. No one was going out to restaurants. No one was going out to hotels. No one was going out in their own way in those days. Of course, the world was not so globalized. There was not so much travel, but they all went home. And as a result, demand fell off. Consumer demand, which is a big engine of the GDP, consumer demand. Has that happened in 2021? Yes, of course. We have seen economy shattered because consumer demand has fallen off dramatically. So those two in common as well. Check. Number three, new technologies. Were they coming out? They were not there yet, but the foundation had already been established. What were the technologies then? All right, let's take a look at them. That was film with sound. Remember, before the 20s, you had movies. Movies had been invented, but they were without sound, right? They were silent movies. So film with sound came out immediately after the world got out of this particular situation of the pandemic. What else? Aviation. The first seeds of global travel was sown right then and there. The first flight from New York transatlantic to Paris took in the roaring 20s. Aviation. What else? The assembly line. Henry Ford developed the assembly line. And up until then, the cars were a luxury. Only few people could own cars because they were expensive to make until Ford came up with his assembly line that made cars cheaper for everybody. Television, for instance, they all came out in that particular period of new technology. Now let's take a look at our period today. Do we have new technologies waiting in the cusp? Absolutely. Artificial intelligence. It is right there. We are using it, but it has not been diffused to become mainstream yet. Right? Machine learning. In fact, artificial intelligence and machine learning has been behind the rise of digital companies who have managed to still continue to operate and succeed in this particular pandemic world. Companies like Google, Amazon, etc. They have benefited because they have managed to use AI and ML, as it is known, in order to further their business. And that will then go mainstream. Has that possibility, which will result in even faster digitalization brought in by cloud and many other tools like 5G, for instance, and 6G. Biotech advances, of course, that will happen. And we are now more sensitized to biotech advances because we have been focused on a biological disease. But what kind of biotech advances are we looking for? Customized medicine, for example. Medicine that works for you because of your own DNA makeup, for instance. Instead of creating a pharmaceutical that has been made for everybody with all of the side effects that we know. That is going to come up. Self-driven cars. This is one of Apple's projects. In 4 years, they want to launch the first self-driven car. So imagine the impact on the economy that everybody then switches their cars from the cars that they have over the years. Of course, it's not going to happen in year one, but over 10 years that they switch from their car to a self-driven car. Where the concept of car, the paradigm of owning a car is going to change. In other words, the paradigm of owning a car today is to get you from point A to point B. But if you have a self-driven car, your car is not going to be just a transportation device. It will be your office. It will be your living room. All right. Internet of Things, for example, IoT. These are just a few things. Again, kind of in some ways, interestingly, common to the previous pandemic. What else was there in the roaring 20s that made it the roaring 20s? That was productivity. As I mentioned, what is productivity? We saw a high level of productivity come out immediately after the pandemic was over. Is that going to be repeated this time? This is a question mark. It is not easy to create productivity, folks. Governments tried. All the governments in the world, they create policies to try to improve productivity, and they will continue to try. Sometimes you see productivity gains in the developing world because they invest in human resources, infrastructure. There are many ways of improving better health, for example, to name a few, of improving productivity. But by and large, we have found in the developed world, it is not an easy thing. But sometimes it could be a problem that productivity has occurred, but we have not been able to capture it with our tools that we have to capture productivity data. That also is possible. But if that were to occur this time around, then folks, I leave you all to think about it. Do you think we have a possibility of the roaring 20s coming back again? A world that is going to grow and grow as the suppressed demand begins to take over, then all of the new technologies that are going to come in this particular world will then take over the growth line pattern. All right, that is what happened in the roaring 20s. The possibility that it happens rests on whether productivity will also be created post-pandemic. All right, I want to kind of close my arguments. All right, I think I've given you a fairly good balance of a little bit of the academic side, the kind of things we talk about. All right, and I've also given you some food for thought. All right, how do we should be looking as for businesses and even indeed as ourselves? How do we position ourselves? How do we prepare ourselves in order to face this new world based on any of the three scenarios? And I'm going to go back, the bad or the benign or the blockbuster scenario. So I'm going to let you to think, and I'm going to give you now time to ask any questions that may have occurred to you while this. Vanessa, please go ahead. Thank you.
Hello.
Thank you.
Good. How has been the experience? For me, it's been amazing, a great pleasure of following your masterclass. And honestly, I have learned a lot. It gave me a lot of ideas, knowledge, skills. So, well, wow, amazed of having the chance of being in a masterclass with you. Let's see. Now it's the turn for questions. Um, any person that has any question can, write down on the chat area any questions. But I think that we have already one question from Diego Jimenez. Okay, the question is, when economic inequity impacts the country's population, increasing collective discontent, what is the role for the new businesses to overcome massive claims for a more diverse and equal society? Please, Gord.
Excellent, excellent question. Businesses can play a very active role in ensuring proactively that the level of discontent, generally speaking, in societies where they are working, through specific steps, human resources steps. Let's start with that. As you mentioned, diverse workforce, better wages. Sometimes companies that are going from the developed world into the developing world, then take the initiative of paying decent wages to the people who are working for them. That then acts as a benchmark for other businesses in that particular country to follow. And thereby, they are raising the incomes of the people. They are seeing that their economic progress is being made with the arrival of such progressively minded businesses. And that is one thing that they can do. Other things that they can do is, of course, ensure that a lot of the value added remains with the society where they function, where they work, such as the example that we took a look at of the coffee farmer in the developing world. If I buy directly from you, I am giving you a higher amount of money for the coffee than you would have otherwise gotten if you had sold it to a intermediary. What is the benefit of that? Well, you're creating a virtuous cycle in that particular case. You're raising the farm income of the particular farmer. That particular farmer is now a lot more happier with the earnings that they are making. They will use that particular earning to buy more products, which then in turn will improve the economy. So we are, as all of the actors, businesses included, we have an extremely important role to ensure that income reaches to the community that has not seen this particular income come in.
Okay, okay, fantastic. Thank you. We have another question. A question coming from Lauren Moss. Okay, question is, I still see a large gap in productivity levels between developed and developing economies. How much of a factor is that gap, and how can countries mitigate it?
It is a conundrum, Lauren. We governments are trying to find a solution. Let's start with the developed world first, all right? Because the developed world and developing world, there are two areas and they have two sets of independent challenges. In the developed world, where we have reached a certain level of technological ability, of course, the productivity gains have been massive. The big gains came in earlier on post World War II. And then we saw a big rise immediately after the launch of internet, and they began to taper off, which was kind of a surprising element by itself, because one would have assumed because of the rapid digitalization, you need less time to complete a particular task, which then automatically should have an impact on productivity gains. But we were not able to notice that. Now, a lot of economists say that that is because of the problems that we are not able to capture how to quantify that particular productivity gains if it has been made in a form that where we can say, yes, productivity gain has been made. So that could be an issue there. Coming to the developing world, we do see increases happening a lot more visibly. Why? Because they are investing in human resources. Just imagine if a country invests in healthcare, automatically you will improve the productivity of that particular country, of the labor force, because a healthier labor force means less sick days, there'll be more going to office, there'll be more turning up to work, thereby increasing the productivity, right? How have you done that? By improving the healthcare system, for instance. Same thing with the universities and with the educational system. If you can raise the level of literacy in the developing world, immediately you will see a jump in productivity. Another big factor, by the way, in the developing world is having women coming into the labor force. All right, they have been behind the cycle, as we know, compared to the developed world in terms of women labor force participation. And by ensuring through social changes and social progression that they attract more women to come into the labor force, we find that it increases the productivity. And there it is a lot more visible. Go ahead.
Fantastic, Gert. Okay, so apparently there are no more questions. Once again, Nagur, I wanted to thank you for your time. I wanted to thank you for being here. It's been amazing. And not just that you have shared all your knowledge as way to see, the way that every day you focus your classes in this very practical method. So it's so interesting. At the same time, I want to thank you to all these students that you have connected today all over the world to be in this masterclass. It's been an honor for EA Business School to have you in this event. And okay, I think we have another question.
Oh, go ahead.
Just 1 second. Okay, I'm waiting to receive the question. Just 1 second, please. Okay. See. Okay, sorry, we are receiving. Okay, yes, there we have Luis Ledesma. Okay, it's asking, what main factors do you think current projects must have to convince their stakeholders to be able to create the progress we need?
Project management, much like businesses, have very similar dynamics, but I assume, Louis, you come from the project management world. Project, unlike business, is not an operation, and it's something that has a specific start date and a finish date. So, the critical area today for projects, of course, is to have a successful project completion. In order to complete a project successfully, you have to complete it within scope, within cost, within time, and within quality parameters, the triple constraints, as we call it in project management. Now, of course, project risk analysis is one of the fundamental ways in how we ensure project integrity, how we ensure that the project does not suffer the risk in order to delay the project, which then can increase the cost of doing the project or delaying the time of project. Let's say if I am a company that is building a highway, and Spanish companies are doing a lot of projects. Let's say I'm doing a highway in Canada, and I have to now take into account, using the same methodology that we discussed here, what are the kind of project risks that can occur to us when we are building this particular highway in Canada. All right, so you would use the same kind of a framework in order to reduce the risk and thereby increase the chances of your success, which is critical to the sponsor of the project.
Fantastic, girl. So, apparently there are no more questions. I don't know if before saying goodbye, you wanted to add anything else to our students, if you want to send any additional message.
Yeah, what I do want everybody, hopefully, that this particular talk has been had two motives, not only to talk about the academic side, but the real situation that we face today, and the role that we need to all play in order to get us out of the particular situation that we are in. Please do get yourself vaccinated so that we all develop herd immunity, so that we all get out of this particular risk, not just for us alone, but for the rest of the world. I think that is fundamentally important for our future success. Thank you.
Completely, Gur. Completely. I'm so agree. So Thank you very much again. It's been a great pleasure. As well as I was saying, thank you very much for all the students that you have connected all over the world today. It's been a pleasure to have you in this event, make it real. Thanks for you as well for these very interesting questions. And well, from my side, I'm here for any questions or doubts that in future you can have if you want to explore more and know more about our MBA programs, about services of our business school. You have my contact details, so I will be more than pleased to assist you. And well, it's been a great pleasure. I hope that soon we could organize another masterclass and have a lovely evening to everybody.
Thank you very much, Vanessa, for your great moderation.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
So,
Take care.
regards to
Take care.
everybody. Bye bye.
Bye.